Okay, so what I'd like to do is to overview 2 of the recruitment templates that we use for onboarding car sales executives. The process effectively has stage 1, which is all really about cultural fit and whether or not they can be managed, whether they can work in a team, and really just to sort of interrogate a little bit about the background of the applicant. Obviously, if we sort of feel that they are a fit for the business, what we will then do is progress them to interview 2 or stage 2. Interview 1 is a WebEx interview, so it's obviously conducted online, similar to Zoom or Microsoft Teams. And then when we actually, and should the applicant be successful to progress through to stage 2, then that will be a physical interview with 2 managers. But that's a separate video, and all we're going to do in this particular program effectively is just overview stage 1 and how it works. So as you can see, it's basically a Microsoft Excel program. We've got some basic information here which we're going to fill out, so I'll just start to fill that out now. We're just sort of looking for a particular dealership that we want to sort of recruit for. We would sort of put in the site contact here, obviously whenever the start date is, but we'll just go as soon as possible for the minute. It's important when you're talking to the applicant just to determine that they do actually have a full license, and also that license is manual and automatic transmission. Ideally, they should have, if they've got some points, like a couple of points, 3 points, ultimately that's not too much of a problem. If it's upwards of 6, then you will get the orange, because technically speaking, if it's anything over 6 points, technically it means we can't recruit them. If they're an absolutely stonking applicant and they seem really well suited, but they've just been caught in a load of cameras or something, then that will need to be referred to an operations director to decide whether or not they want to sort of progress forward with it. Obviously, if they're foreign in any way, we need to make sure that they have a right to work in the UK. If they are a previous Motorline employee, then we need to obtain an internal reference. So we need to go back to the original dealer where they worked and find out whether they were a suitable employee. That's really essential to decide whether or not we're going to take them on. If there is nobody that continues to work at that dealership that remembers that particular individual, then we would need to go to HR and just see is there any performance issues, grievances, disciplinaries, anything along those lines. But if it's no, they don't have any form of record, or someone's not prepared to provide one, then obviously we can't really continue. We must have that. But we're just going to say for the minute that if they're a previous Motorline employee, for the moment, no, they're not. So we're just going to sort of switch all of that off. Okay, good stuff. So if we just sort of move on to these interview questions, the first one, as you would expect, that if people are applying to work at this particular dealer group, that they I'll just sort of enlarge it a little bit so you can see a bit closer. It is important that they actually have bothered to do a little bit of research about the company. So have they, and in terms of what sort of questions we could ask the applicant, we do have 4 question sets here. You don't have to do them in these orders. You can actually sort of drop down from selections here. So that's kind of itself not too much of a problem. So have they looked at the Motorline website? What can they actually tell us about Motorline? Whereabouts do we have sites? How many dealers do we have? What brands represented within the Motorline group? So this little question here, you pop the answers into here, and the same way with those questions, you put them into here, these ones into there. You get the idea. If obviously you do want to do some writing, it's quite small font. It's font size 8, which you can see just up here. So you can actually write quite a lot of notes, which you believe, into these little boxes, and they're wrap boxes. So if I just keep typing, you'll just see it types underneath. Doesn't write it's sort of all hide away, so off the cell. Once we've sort of determined whether they do have any sort of knowledge or information about Motorline, what we then do is we just move to their current and previous employment. So obviously what we can't necessarily do is sort of legislate or state really specifically why or what all the questions should be that we ask them. We've just given you some examples of questions that you could use. So this follows the same format as the question sets at the top. Each little box has got a drop down set of questions that you can select. Okay, and you would pop your answer in here. So a very obvious one is why are they leaving, or they've left their existing business. A lot of people tend to give the stock answers for that. Oh, I've decided to progress my career. Invariably, if you're happy in your current job and you're earning half sensible money, people don't generally move. So there's probably something lying beneath that, which you nearly always find out. So that's why we have got all these other questions that are trying to root out the root cause of their desire to leave their existing business. So it'll say here, sort of out of 10, how would you rank your last company? So obviously if they rank that as an 8 or something, then obviously we would say, well, the 2 that's missing, what would sort of need to improve to make that up to a 10? So we'd obviously pop the answer into there. Now, you might not actually like some of these questions. You might sort of think, well, I actually want to ask my own question. They said that they were leaving this particular company because they weren't happy. So you might sort of put into sort of here, why were you not happy in your last role? Okay, so we've just over-typed a drop-down field. Okay, so whilst we can select different questions, okay, you can actually type in your own that might reflect something that's caused you to ask a question from the previous answer that the applicant gave. So we could just sort of put the answer in there. It's not mandated that you ask every single one of these questions. I mean, I did an interview the other day, and I think I asked 1 or 2 of these, and then I think I just wrote over here just loads of notes and questions that I wanted to ask specifically to what or how they were actually answering. So obviously it'll do this for employment 1, and there's lots of different questions here. How would you describe your last company? What are the top sort of 3 company must-haves that you want when you come to work for your next employer? And that sort of reveals things. Sometimes people say things like, oh, I want to actually work this time with a team that I get on with. Whoa, right, so suddenly it's starting to open up. They're not necessarily moving because I wanted to progress my career, it's because obviously they're not getting on with the team. Why they're not getting on with their team? Well, then you'd start to overtype these questions with questions that are more reflective of what your the sort of question line that you want to go down. But if you actually wanted to stick with those questions, then of course you can do that. Who has been your best company and why? Oh, it's definitely ABC company, because the managers keep right off your back and they never give you any reviews. Well, actually that's not a good thing, but you get the idea. So there's lots of different questions here that you can ask, and you can do that backwards of 3 employments. Now there is 3 employments there, but if you sort of think, well, actually I want to go back 4 employments or 5 employments, just scroll further down to the bottom here, and there's like a free type notes section where you can sort of type in whatever you want. So there's no sort of issue really. Now, just generally speaking, ideally what we're kind of looking for is at least 2 years in each of their employments, which does seem to be quite challenging these days. But what we don't really want to see is too many journeymen or job hoppers. We want people to try and have been in the previous roles for a reasonable period of time, and if they haven't, then we're kind of looking for things like furlough, redundancy, all that kind of stuff. For some of the roles, it is quite important that people do have an idea about IT and systems. So do they currently use Microsoft Excel? Could you actually create a document and save it? Do you use formulas? Okay, so it's not essential that they have to have that for a salesman, but it's really just interesting to know whether they've sort of got some basic Word sort of skill sets in there. Same with PowerPoint, because some of the add-on presentations of PowerPoint, have you ever used it? Have you ever created with it? Again, it's not a deal breaker if they haven't, but it's just all about how rounded they are. It does, strangely enough, and this would be for more experienced salespeople. For an inexperienced one, you'd probably leave this out, but it's whether or not they've got any automotive sort of systems experience, like Inquiry Max. Have they ever worked with ITC? They've worked with CDK Drive. Sometimes people might have worked with Dealer Web. Even though we use Inquiry Max, that's still a good thing, because Dealer Web is an excellent system. Dealer Web is a diary management and prospect management system. Have they actually used BCA Dealer Pro? So excuse me. As you can see, there are lots and lots and lots of different automotive systems, so it's not exhaustive. Now, there might very well be that, you know, Key to Key is a Volkswagen parity modelling system for retention, and it might be that you know, somebody has got, you know, a different system that's not necessarily listed in these drop downs. If they have, again, they're free type. You can just over type the data validation cells, those drop down cells. Any other little notes that you want to type in, happy days, just whack them in. Okay, so you will obviously have noticed that on the right hand side there is this abort interview button. Well, that might just very well be that so far that it's gone so badly, and there's such a lack of enthusiasm and dynamism with the individual just from going through the motorline questions in their previous employment. You think, I don't really want to be sitting on this interview for the next 1 hour. So you can literally hit the abort interview button if you so wish. If you were to sort of tap, if you were to sort of tap these abort interview buttons, it'll take you to some narrative that helps you to exit quite quickly. So we just say something along the lines of like, okay, well, look, thanks very much, Patrick, you know, for taking me sort of through your background. Motorline, yeah, we always sort of take people through like a preliminary sort of meet and greet digitally, so it's only really, if anything, just to sort of understand a little bit about your career history, identify a little bit about your skills, what you've been up to, and sometimes also that if you haven't had an experience in the trade, it's just so that we can identify what sort of, you know, training requirements we might need to sort of provide to you. What we usually do just after this very sort of quick meet and greet is the next step is for us to invite all of the successful applicants back for a second interview at our dealership. And if we were to invite you back for a second interview, sort of the conclusion of all of the meet and greet interviews that we're doing, is that something you'd be interested in attending? Obviously we've got no intention whatsoever, but it looks as like we're sort of treating this whole thing seriously, but we want to exit it. Once they'll usually say yes. Okay, well, look, should we be in a position to do that, we'll let you know in sort of 3 or 4 days time. But other than that, if you've got any questions to ask, if they have, answer them. If they haven't, boom, we're done, we can exit. But obviously we, you know, if we think they're a good one, we wouldn't necessarily go that route, and we're going to move on to teamwork. So if you've got a good sales team, the last thing we want to do is recruit in a bad egg. So you can see here that just in the same way, you've got a number of different questions here that you can ask the applicant. Do you enjoy being part of a team? What does good teamwork mean to you? Reflecting on a past team, tell me where teamwork may have broken down or failed. You get some choice answers there, I can tell you. Make sure you write it down. What do you find the most challenging element being part of a sales team? You could also sort of ask, well, how do you feel targets and commissions conflict within you know, a sales team? What we'll then do is move on to management, because we want to make sure that the applicant is someone that we can manage and they can be managed and they're accepting of our management style. So why not ask them that, you know, how would you honestly describe your last manager, because that's a clear indication on how they like to be managed. We'll type our answers in here. What do you find the most frustrating about a current or a previous boss? Again, all sorts of different questions in here. How would you describe the ideal boss? And has a manager been the cause of you deciding to leave a company? So some basic information that we have. and if you don't like those questions, you can type in your own one and pop the answer in here. Now you might sort of say, well, why have we got this sort of educational thing popped into here? Because there are different levels of qualifications. So people with no qualifications, we have some people with GCSEs, A-levels and general degrees. But I actually had a lady apply for one of our car dealerships, and she was a graduate from King's College, Cambridge, and she'd got an MSc in some degree to do with health and sort of hygiene. And you kind of sort of think, well, to get into Cambridge University, that's a massively expensive and, you know, incredibly well thought of university. Why do you want to come and sell used cars? So, you know, it might be just a stopgap. That isn't necessarily why we want it. So if they've got a high-end degree, veterinary medicine, doctor, accountancy, solicitors, lawyers, anything that's sort of a bit up there, specialist degrees, we kind of really need to ask, why is it that they're applying for the motor trade? You know, because technically we would, you know, we're looking for the right nature of person rather than necessarily qualifications. The next one we have to be sort of quite careful with, which is really, I think we should ask them what their hobbies and interests are, because I think that's very important when we're reflecting on these sort of hours that we do. So we've got these little questions here, which is our working hours between these times, rotated into 7 o'clock, and of course we need to know that they can accommodate those hours. We also need them to understand that our working week is 5 or 5.5 days rotated into the weekends. So that means that they might be doing every other Sunday, or it might be that they do one Sunday in 3, and depending upon the size of the sales team, sometimes they might even get the weekend off. But we need to know whether that presents any issues for them. Okay, so if you're in a franchised business as opposed to a used car operation, you know, March and September are our busiest months generally, so therefore we prefer holidays not to be taken either side of that. So how do you know, are you okay with this arrangement? Because obviously, you know, through March that's a big build up, throughout February that's a big build up for March, so you know, we generally want people to sort of be focusing on selling cars for themselves and for us. And then finally, it's really just on the hours thing. Would any other out of work or personal responsibility that you have conflict with our working hours? So that's all good. Now, if any of that sort of goes wrong, boom, we can go into the abort button. If we are clear, even if they have no car sales experience, I interviewed a girl just a few days ago that was very administrative based, but I still asked her to try and walk me through a car sales process. So I just clicked on here, and this is where we would write in the spine of the process. And then on the outsides here, this is really if they mention anything to do with, you know, management involvement, add-on products, compliance, dock days, second facing, you know, any of those sort of things. But we just have to say to them, like I said to this girl the other day, well, look, just imagine you were sitting at a desk and a customer walks in and they're interested in buying a car. Tell me what you do. You know, anything from literally from getting out of your chair to a deal happening. What do you think the steps might be? Now, although we should all know what it is, we have here the physical sales process when someone walks through the door, and then this one here is the digital sales process where you in effect probably wouldn't necessarily come face to face with them until handover, which is what we've been operating during COVID times. So all we basically do is we sort of put in here, I'd first of all meet and greet the customer, then I'd probably fact find and find a little bit of information out of them, you know, then I'll probably go on a little test drive, then I might do some sort of figures, and then hopefully, you know, make a sale. Sometimes it's just literally as brief as that. Sometimes you get people that give you a really comprehensive answer. Return to the question sets, and then it just kind of make sure we're in the right sort of ballpark. You know, did you have any sort of salary expectations or minimum salary expectations? Yes, I want to earn £30,000 a year. We just pop that in. If I put that in properly, so let's put in 30,000. Now, if you like, you'll know by this stage, because obviously we've not hit that abort button, whether we like them or not. And if we do, it's as important for us to really sell us to them as much as it is for them to sell themselves to the business. So it's really important here to sort of take them through, well, what's the career progression path all the way through the motor line management structure, starting from a sales executive and literally going right the way through to a director of the operation. And it's just also important to mention there are other roles such as marketing, IT, compliance, renewals, accountancy. So really there's great opportunities. Take them a little bit through the training the group will provide. So that it kind of lands us on the final one just before we go or exit the interview, which is to sort of note any questions that they might have. And if we were to invite them back for an interview, would they say yes or no? If they did say no, which would be highly unusual, let's find out what's causing the issue. So now we would then exit the interview and we are finished. So they've gone offline, and I would advise you do this straight away, which is while it's fresh in your head, score them, rank them. It's only a sort of basic sort of red and green sort of response on how you felt that interview went. So this is an after interview assessment. So it's just how punctual was the applicant arriving on the WebEx. Were they late? Were they on time? So if they were 1 to sort of 4 minutes before, should be green really that. If they were early, happy days, but obviously if they've come to the meeting after the appointed time, then it will flash red. So I think it's important, in terms of the CV, obviously we would have looked at that beforehand. How would you describe that CV? Spelling, grammar. A lot of people now liaise with us electronically and digitally. So it's really important that we have people that haven't got any obvious errors in their CV, especially not major grammar and spelling issues. Then move on to, did the applicant's appearance appear to be Motorline Group standard? If it's no, it's not the end of the world. We just need to check with HR. If they've got a stonking great swastika on their cheek, then that's probably going to be a no. But sometimes, depending on where the tattoos are or piercings and bits and pieces, it's important we get clarity as to whether or not that's something that's acceptable from a customer facing perspective. Was the applicant clearly spoken? In other words, were they heavily accented if they've come from another country? So it's important for us to say whether they were good on that respect. Did they seem focused throughout the interview? Sometimes you can see people glancing at their phone and all sorts of bits and pieces, looking away. So they were very active from that perspective, which is good. Did they seem passionate and enthusiastic to take the job on? Happy days. And then finally, did the applicant, did they have a good vibrant personality? Were they smiling? All the sort of stuff you really expect when you the sort of stuff that you would expect when you're interviewing somebody and they're sitting with a customer. Other than that would kind of finish the interview. Any notes, jot them down, because you are absolutely going to need, should you wish to recruit somebody, you're going to need to put this with the application when you send it into HR. But other than that kind of just overviews template 1. Have a look at template 2, which is the more intense one that's assessing their skill sets to be able to do the job. So that's it, and thanks for listening.